Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable lives and incredible hardships of medieval blacksmiths, the everyday heroes who, despite the odds, managed to survive some of the most physically demanding and dangerous work in history. From scorching forges to crushing labor, their story is one of grit, strength, and determination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of medieval life, you might imagine skilled craftsmen creating beautiful swords and armor in clean workshops. But for the average blacksmith, reality was less about glory and more about, how do I not die today from burns, exhaustion, or crushing injuries? Picture this. You're waking up before dawn in a tiny workshop that's also your home. The smell of coal dust and metal shavings fills your lungs. Your hands are already scarred and calloused from years of gripping hot iron. Your back aches from yesterday's work. And you're only 25 years old, which in blacksmith years makes you practically ancient. The forge sits cold and dark in the corner, waiting to become a roaring inferno that will heat your workspace to unbearable temperatures. Your tools, hammers, tongs, and anvils are arranged exactly where you left them because losing a tool could mean losing a day's work, or worse, a finger. You don't have the luxury of hitting snooze or grabbing coffee. The moment you wake up, you're working. Because in medieval times, if you're not working, you're not eating. And if you're not eating, well, you won't be working much longer anyway. Your first job of the day is to get the forge burning. This isn't like turning on a stove. You need to gather coal or charcoal, arrange it properly, and use a bellows to pump air until the flames catch. This alone can take an hour, and you haven't even started smithing yet. The air in the smithy is already thick with smoke. Your eyes water, your throat burns. But this is normal. This is every single morning. Welcome to life as a medieval blacksmith, where your day starts with fire, pain, and the knowledge that things are only going to get hotter from here. So, you've managed to wake up and light the forge. Congratulations. Now comes the part where your body starts to wonder why you chose this profession. The forge is roaring now, glowing orange and red like the mouth of a dragon. The heat is unimaginable. In summer, the smithy becomes a furnace within a furnace. Temperatures inside can soar past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's before you factor in standing next to a forge that's burning at over 2,000 degrees. There's no air conditioning, no fans, no relief. Just you, the fire, and a wool tunic soaked through with sweat. In winter, you might think it's better. Wrong. The forge keeps the area around it warm, sure, but the rest of the smithy is freezing. Your fingers go numb when you're not actively working near the flames. And if you're working on a large piece that needs to cool slowly, you're stuck in that transitional zone. Too hot on one side, too cold on the other, comfortable nowhere. Let's talk about what you're wearing. As a blacksmith, you don't have protective gear like modern welders. No fireproof gloves, no face shields, no steel-toed boots. You've got a leather apron if you're lucky, a rough wool tunic, and maybe some cloth wrapped around your hands to keep from losing skin every time you grab a hot tool. Your apron, if you even own one, is stiff and cracked from years of sweat, sparks, and the occasional splash of molten metal. It smells like burning hair because that's exactly what's happening. Little bits of you are constantly singeing away, eyebrows, arm hair, and the occasional patch of scalp if you lean too close to the flames. Your feet are either bare or wrapped in thin leather shoes that do absolutely nothing to protect you from falling metal, stray coals, or the inevitable moment when you step on a red-hot shard of iron that somehow ended up on the floor. And speaking of the floor, it's dirt. Compacted, sure, but still dirt, mixed with ash, coal dust, metal shavings, and your own sweat. Every step kicks up a cloud of particulates that you breathe in with every labored breath. Your lungs are slowly turning into a geological survey of medieval metallurgy. But here's the worst part. You can't complain. Everyone else is suffering too. The baker is burning his hands on ovens. The tanner is knee-deep in animal hides and urine. The farmer is breaking his back in the fields. Pain is the universal language of medieval labor. So, you stand there, sweating, squinting through smoke, and you haven't even picked up a hammer yet. This is just the beginning, and your body is already begging you to quit. Now that the forge is hot, and you're drenched in sweat, it's time to actually start working. And let me be clear, this isn't delicate craft work. This is brutal, repetitive, bone-crushing labor that will break your body piece by piece. Let's say a local lord has ordered a batch of horseshoes. Simple enough, right? Wrong. Each horseshoe requires heating the iron multiple times, hammering it into shape, punching holes for nails, and making sure it's exactly the right size and curve. One horseshoe might take 30 minutes to an hour. The Lord wants 20. That's your whole day right there, assuming nothing goes wrong. But things always go wrong. The iron cracks because it wasn't heated evenly. The hammer slips and you smash your thumb. The tongs lose their grip, and a glowing piece of metal goes flying across the room, landing dangerously close to your foot, or worse, on it. Every strike of the hammer reverberates through your arms, shoulders, and spine. You're swinging a tool that weighs anywhere from 2 to 10 pounds over and over and over, hundreds of times per piece, thousands of times per day. Your joints scream, your muscles burn, and you're only halfway through the morning. Let's talk about the hammer itself. It's not balanced like a modern tool. It's a crude chunk of iron attached to a wooden handle that's starting to crack. If the handle breaks mid-swing, the hammerhead can fly off and hit you, your apprentice, or anyone unlucky enough to be nearby. The anvil, your most important piece of equipment, is just a massive block of iron. No padding, no shock absorption. Every time you strike hot metal, the vibration shoots straight up your arm. Do this for 10, 20, 30 years, and you'll develop arthritis so severe you can barely open your hand in the morning. And then there's the noise. The constant, relentless noise. Metal on metal, ringing like a church bell that never stops. Your ears ring long after you've stopped working. Many blacksmiths go partially or completely deaf by middle age, but there's no hearing protection, no earplugs, just your skull absorbing the punishment day after day. Oh, and let's not forget the sparks. Every time you strike hot iron, tiny molten fragments explode outward. They land on your arms, your face, your neck. Each one a miniature brand, a tiny searing kiss of pain. You learn to ignore them. You have to. Otherwise, you'd spend your whole day flinching. By midday, you're exhausted. Your hands are blistered and bleeding. Your back is on fire, and you're not even close to done. Because in medieval times, there's no 8-hour workday, no lunch break, no union to protect you. You work from dawn until dusk, and if you don't finish, you don't get paid. Welcome to the forge, where every day is a test of endurance, and every swing of the hammer is a reminder that your body is your only tool, and it's breaking down fast. Let's pause for a moment and talk about something you probably take for granted. Safety. In the modern world, dangerous jobs come with regulations, protective equipment, insurance, and lawsuits if something goes wrong. In medieval times, you have none of that. If you get hurt, that's your problem. Blacksmithing is one of the most dangerous professions in the Middle Ages, and the list of things that can go wrong is terrifyingly long. Let's start with burns. The most common injury. You're working with metal heated to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. One wrong move, and you're branded for life. Grab a piece of iron with your tongs, but your grip isn't quite right. The metal slips. Instinct makes you try to catch it. Congratulations, you now have third-degree burns across your palm. There's no emergency room, no burn cream, no skin grafts. Just cold water if you're lucky, and a rag soaked in animal fat to wrap it up. Infection is almost guaranteed. Or maybe you're working near the forge and a coal pops, sending a glowing ember directly into your eye. You're half blind now, and there's no surgery to fix it. You just learn to work with one eye and hope the other doesn't get hit too. Then there are the cuts. You're constantly handling sharp tools, rough metal, and freshly forged edges. A piece of iron with a jagged burr catches your forearm as you're moving it. Blood everywhere. You wrap it up and keep working because stopping means losing money. That cut gets infected because your hands are filthy. And now, you're running a fever. If you're lucky, your body fights it off. If not, well, sepsis doesn't care how strong you are. Let's not forget the crushing injuries. Anvils weigh hundreds of pounds. If one tips over while you're adjusting it, it can shatter your foot, your leg, or worse. I've heard of blacksmiths losing toes, breaking bones, and even being pinned under equipment with no one around to help. Oh, and there's always the risk of fire. You're working in a wooden building filled with flammable materials, coal dust, straw, and dry wood. One stray spark, one unattended ember, and the whole smithy goes up in flames. If you're inside when it happens, you might not make it out. Even your tools can kill you. A hammerhead that flies off mid-swing can crack a skull. A poorly tempered blade can shatter and send shrapnel into your face. Tongs can slip and send molten metal flying. Every single task you perform has the potential to maim or kill you. And here's the thing. No one cares. There's no workers' compensation. If you're injured and can't work, you don't eat. If you're killed, your family might get nothing. The lord you were working for will just find another blacksmith. So, every morning, you wake up knowing that today could be the day. The day you make one small mistake that costs you a hand, an eye, or your life. And yet, you go back to the forge. Because what choice do you have? Assuming you've survived the morning without losing a finger, it's time to eat. And let me tell you, your lunch break is nothing like grabbing a sandwich and scrolling through your phone. It's more like collapsing in a corner, choking down whatever stale bread you can afford, and praying you have enough energy to finish the day. Let's start with what you're eating. As a blacksmith, you're not wealthy. You're a craftsman, sure, but you're not nobility. Most of your income goes toward tools, materials, and keeping your forge running. What's left over barely covers food. Your typical meal is a hunk of coarse bread, hard as a rock and made from barley or rye because wheat is for rich people. You dip it in watered-down ale or weak beer because, let's face it, the local water is probably contaminated. If you're lucky, you have some cheese or a bit of salted pork, but meat is a luxury you can't afford most days. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And even then, it's turnips, onions, or cabbage boiled into a flavorless mush. There's no seasoning because spices cost more than your weekly wages. Salt, if you can get it, is worth its weight in silver. Fruit is a rare treat. And when you do get it, it's often half rotten or fermented into something vaguely alcoholic. Fresh milk spoils within hours, so you drink it warm and hope it doesn't give you a stomachache. Cheese is safer, but it's hard, crumbly, and tastes like old socks. You eat this meal standing up, leaning against your anvil, because sitting down means your back will seize up and you won't be able to get up again. You chew quickly, mechanically, not because you're enjoying it, but because you need fuel. Your body is a furnace, and food is the coal that keeps you going. And let's talk about your teeth. By the time you're 30, you've probably lost a few. Chewing that rock-hard bread every day wears them down to nubs. Cavities are rampant because dental hygiene consists of occasionally rinsing your mouth with water or wine. If a tooth starts to rot, your options are to live with the pain or have it yanked out by the local barber, the same guy who cuts hair and performs surgery, usually without anesthesia. Your gums are probably swollen and bleeding. Your breath could knock out a horse, but everyone else smells just as bad, so no one notices. Halitosis is just part of life. After your so-called meal, you get maybe 15 minutes to rest before you have to go back to work. No nap, no relaxation, just a brief moment to let your muscles stop screaming before you pick up the hammer again. And here's the cruel irony. You're doing some of the hardest physical labor imaginable, burning thousands of calories a day, but you're probably malnourished. You don't get enough protein, vitamins, or minerals. Your body is slowly eating itself just to keep you functional. So, you finish your bread, wash it down with flat ale, and drag yourself back to the forge. Because the work doesn't stop. The orders don't stop. And if you stop, you starve. Welcome to lunch as a medieval blacksmith. By mid-afternoon, You're already exhausted, but the work is far from over. And now, we need to talk about one of the most overlooked aspects of blacksmithing: your lungs. Because while burns and broken bones are visible, the invisible damage happening inside your chest is just as deadly. Every time you pump the bellows, every time you strike hot metal, every time the forge roars to life, you're breathing in a toxic cocktail of smoke, coal dust, and metal particles. There's no ventilation in your smithy, no exhaust fans, no air filters, just a small window or door that lets in a pathetic trickle of fresh air. Coal smoke is thick, black, and choking. It coats your throat and lungs with a grimy residue that never fully clears. You cough constantly, a deep, rattling cough that brings up black phlegm. This is your body's desperate attempt to expel the filth, but it's a losing battle. Charcoal, which some blacksmiths use, is slightly better, but not by much. It still fills the air with fine particles that settle deep in your lungs. Over years, this leads to what we now call black lung disease or pneumoconiosis. Your lung tissue hardens and scars, making it harder and harder to breathe. Then there's the metal dust. Iron, steel, copper, whatever you're working with, tiny fragments are constantly flaking off and becoming airborne. You inhale them with every breath. They lodge in your lungs and never come out. Modern studies show that prolonged exposure to metal dust can cause serious respiratory diseases and even cancer. Medieval blacksmiths didn't know this, but they felt it. They felt their breathing get shallower, their stamina decrease, their energy drain away. And let's not forget the chemicals. If you're working with anything beyond basic iron, you might be exposed to lead, arsenic, or other toxic substances used in metalworking. Lead poisoning causes headaches, confusion, abdominal pain, and eventually, death. Arsenic does much the same. You don't know what's killing you. You just know you feel sick all the time. Your eyes are another casualty. Constant smoke makes them red, irritated, and watery. You squint so much that wrinkles form around your eyes by your mid-20s. Your vision gets blurry, partly from the smoke and partly from staring into the blinding light of the forge for hours on end. Cataracts are common among blacksmiths, and there's no surgery to fix them. Oh, and the smell. Let's talk about the smell. Burning coal, hot metal, your own sweat, and occasionally the acrid stench of singed hair or flesh when you get too close to the forge. It's a smell that soaks into your clothes, your skin, your hair. You can scrub all you want, but it never fully goes away. You carry the forge with you everywhere. But here's the thing. You can't stop. You can't take a sick day because your lungs hurt. You can't step outside for fresh air because the work is piling up. You just keep going, breathing in poison, coughing up blackness, and hoping you'll live long enough to see your children take over the smithy, because that's the legacy of a blacksmith. Not wealth, not fame, just a pair of ruined lungs and a cough that echoes long after you're gone. Let's talk about something that modern workers take for granted: weekends. In the 21st century, we work 5 days a week, maybe 6 if we're unlucky. But as a medieval blacksmith, the concept of a weekend doesn't exist. You work every single day except Sundays. And even then, you're probably doing maintenance. Medieval life revolves around the church calendar. Sundays are holy days, which means no work. But that doesn't mean you get to relax. You're expected to attend Mass, which can last for hours. You stand in a cold, drafty church, listening to a sermon in Latin that you don't understand, while your back aches and your hands throb from the week's labor. After church, you might get a few hours to yourself, but those hours are usually spent on chores, repairing your tools, organizing your workspace, gathering coal for the week ahead. There's always something that needs doing. And then there are the feast days, the holy days scattered throughout the year. These are supposed to be celebrations, but for you, they're just more unpaid days off. No work means no income. So while the nobles are feasting on roasted boar and honeyed wine, you're at home, gnawing on stale bread and wondering how you're going to pay your rent. Let's talk about your actual work schedule. You start before dawn, as soon as there's enough light to see by. You work straight through until sunset, which in summer means 14, 15, sometimes 16 hours of labor. In winter, the days are shorter, but the work is just as hard because the metal is colder and takes longer to heat. There's no concept of overtime pay. If a customer needs something urgently, you work through the night. If you don't, they'll take their business to another blacksmith, and word will spread that you're unreliable. Your reputation is everything, so you sacrifice sleep, health, and sanity to meet deadlines. And here's the cruel irony. The harder you work, the more your body breaks down. But if you don't work hard, you starve. It's a trap with no escape. You're caught in a cycle of exhaustion, pain, and desperation. Let's say you want to take a day off. Maybe you're sick or injured, or just so tired you can't lift a hammer. Too bad. If you're not working, you're not earning. And if you're not earning, your family isn't eating. So you drag yourself to the forge, sick or not, injured or not, and you work through the pain. Even sleep is a luxury you can't afford. You collapse into bed at night, muscles screaming, lungs burning, and fall asleep the moment your head hits the straw mattress. But your sleep is fitful, interrupted by nightmares of the forge, by the ache in your joints, by the cough that won't stop. You wake up exhausted, and the cycle begins again, and God forbid you get injured. If you break a bone or burn your hand so badly you can't work, you're out of commission for weeks, maybe months. During that time, you earn nothing. Your savings, if you have any, drain away. Your family suffers. And when you finally recover, you're behind on orders, behind on rent, and have to work twice as hard to catch up. This is the reality of being a medieval blacksmith. No vacations, no sick days, no retirement plan. Just endless grinding labor until your body gives out or you die, whichever comes first. Now, let's talk about something that's equally exhausting, the customers. Because it's not just the physical labor that wears you down. It's the constant demands, complaints, and impossible expectations from the people you're working for. First, there's the local lord. He's your most important customer because he controls the land, the laws, and basically your entire existence. When he orders something, you drop everything and make it a priority. A new sword? You work day and night. Horseshoes for his entire stable? There goes your week. And here's the thing. He doesn't pay you right away. Nobles operate on credit, which means you might not see a single coin for months. But you can't refuse because refusing a lord is a great way to lose your livelihood, or worse, your head. Then there are the merchants. They need tools, nails, hinges, locks, all the practical items that keep commerce moving. They haggle over every price, trying to squeeze you for a discount, and they're always in a hurry. I need it by tomorrow, they say, as if you don't have 10 other orders already. Farmers are another headache. They need plowshares, sickles, and horseshoes, but they're poor and can barely afford to pay you. Often they trade goods instead of coin. A bushel of wheat, a chicken, a jug of cider. It's better than nothing, but it's not exactly a stable income. And let's not forget the common folk, your neighbors, the everyday people who need knives, pots, nails, or repairs. They expect you to drop everything and help them, often for little or no payment, because we're neighbors, aren't we? They don't understand that you're running a business, not a charity. Every customer thinks their order is the most important. Everyone wants it done yesterday. And if something goes wrong, if a tool breaks or doesn't meet their expectations, they blame you. Never mind that the iron you're working with is impure, or that they didn't specify exactly what they wanted. It's always your fault. Arguments are common. A farmer complains that the horseshoe you made doesn't fit properly. You explain that his horse's hooves are uneven and he needs to see a farrier first. He accuses you of shoddy work and refuses to pay. Now you're out the materials and the labor. Or a merchant claims the nails you made are too brittle. You know it's because he stored them in a damp shed and they rusted, but he won't accept that. He demands a refund or replacement, and you have to comply to keep his business. Dealing with people is exhausting in ways the forge never is. At least metal is predictable. Heat it, hammer it, cool it. But people, they're irrational, demanding, and often unreasonable. And you can't lose your temper. If you snap at a customer, word spreads. Soon, no one wants to work with the angry blacksmith. So you smile, nod, and swallow your frustration, even when you want to throw a horseshoe at their head. By the end of the day, you're not just physically exhausted. You're mentally drained, worn down by the constant negotiations, complaints, and impossible demands. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. Welcome to customer service, medieval style. Let's shift gears and talk about your tools, because in the modern world, if a tool breaks, you go to the store and buy a new one. Simple. But as a medieval blacksmith, your tools are everything, and replacing them is neither easy nor cheap. Your hammer, tongs, chisels, punches, and anvil are your livelihood. Without them, you can't work. And here's the problem. Tools wear out. Hammers crack, tongs bend, chisels dull. And when they break, you can't just order a replacement online. You have to make a new one yourself. That's right. A blacksmith has to forge his own tools, which means taking time away from paid work to create the very instruments that let you do paid work. It's a vicious cycle. You need tools to make money, but making tools costs you money. Let's say your favorite hammer breaks. The wooden handle splits clean in two. Now you need to find a suitable piece of wood, shape it, attach a new iron head, and make sure it's balanced properly. This can take an entire day, and during that day, you're not earning anything. Or maybe your tongs are worn down from years of gripping hot metal. The jaws don't close properly anymore, which makes it dangerous to work. So you heat up some iron, hammer out new tongs, and temper them. Another day gone. The anvil, your most important tool, is supposed to last a lifetime. But even anvils wear down. The surface gets pitted and uneven from years of hammering. Ideally, you'd have it resurfaced, but that requires taking it to another blacksmith who specializes in anvil repair and transporting a 400-pound anvil? Good luck. Some tools you can't even make yourself. Specialized items like files, certain chisels, or high-quality steel punches have to be purchased from other craftsmen, and they're expensive. A single file might cost a week's wages, but without it, you can't do fine detail work, which means you lose customers. Then there's the problem of theft. Tools are valuable, and not everyone is honest. If someone breaks into your smithy and steals your best hammer or a set of tongs, you're in serious trouble. You can't afford to replace them easily, and there's no insurance to cover the loss. Maintaining your tools is a constant chore. Every evening after a long day of work, you have to inspect your equipment. Are the handles loose? Is the metal chipped? Are the tongs still aligned? You oil the moving parts, sharpen the edges, and make minor repairs. It's tedious, but necessary. Neglect your tools, and they'll fail you when you need them most. And let's talk about the bellows. This device pumps air into the forge to keep the fire hot. It's made of wood and leather, and both materials degrade over time. The leather cracks and tears, the wood warps and splits. Replacing the bellows is a major expense, and if it breaks in the middle of a job, you're stuck. No air, no fire. No fire, no work. Your tools aren't just objects. They're extensions of your body. A blacksmith's skill is only as good as the tools he wields, and keeping those tools in working order is a full-time job in itself. So yes, you're a blacksmith, but you're also a carpenter, a leather worker, and a constant repairman, all unpaid. Now let's talk about something that looms over every medieval worker like a dark cloud: taxes. Because in the Middle Ages, you don't just work for yourself. You work for the king, the church, the local lord, and anyone else with the power to demand a piece of your income. As a blacksmith, you're considered a craftsman, which sounds prestigious until you realize it just means you're a reliable target for taxation. Let's break down who's taking your money and why you can't do anything about it. First, there's the lord of the manor. You live on his land, which means you owe him rent, fees, and a portion of your earnings. This might be a fixed amount, or it might be a percentage of your income. Either way, it's not negotiable. If you don't pay, you're evicted, or worse. Then there's the king. Royal taxes are collected to fund wars, build castles, and maintain the royal court. These taxes come in many forms. A hearth tax based on how many fireplaces you have, a poll tax based on the number of people in your household, or a trade tax based on the goods you sell. Every time you turn around, someone is demanding money in the king's name. Don't forget the church. As a good Christian, you're expected to pay tithes, a tenth of your income, to support the local parish. This is technically voluntary, but let's be real. If you don't pay, the priest will publicly shame you during Mass, and your neighbors will treat you like a heretic. So you pay, even though you can barely afford it. Then there are the guild fees. If you're a member of the Blacksmiths Guild, and you probably are because it's nearly impossible to work without guild approval, you have to pay annual dues. These fees go toward maintaining the guild hall, funding apprenticeships, and lobbying local authorities. It's like a medieval union, except you have no choice but to join. Oh, and let's not forget the random fees. Need to use the Lord's road to transport goods? That's a toll. Want to sell your work at the market? That's a stall fee. Building a new workshop? That's a construction tax. Every little thing has a cost, and you're the one paying it. Here's the worst part. Taxes aren't predictable. A bad harvest, a war, or just a greedy lord can mean sudden, unexpected demands for more money. You might get a notice that you owe double the usual amount this year. No explanation, no appeal, just pay up or face the consequences. And if you can't pay, debt is a nightmare in medieval times. You can be thrown in prison, have your tools confiscated, or even be sold into indentured servitude to work off what you owe. Your family suffers. Your reputation is destroyed. And good luck ever getting out of debt once you're in it. So, every coin you earn, every horseshoe you sell, every tool you forge, a chunk of it goes to someone else. You're not working for yourself. You're working for a system that's designed to extract as much wealth from you as possible while giving you just enough to survive. Barely. Taxes aren't just an inconvenience. They're a constant, suffocating weight that keeps you trapped in poverty no matter how hard you work. Welcome to medieval economics. Let's talk about something even more grim. Your life expectancy. Because here's the truth. Being a medieval blacksmith is a slow, grinding path toward an early grave. Most blacksmiths don't make it past 50. Many don't even see 40. And if you do somehow survive into old age, you're a broken shell of a man, crippled by decades of brutal labor. Let's start with the injuries. We've already talked about burns, cuts, and broken bones, but those are just the acute injuries. The real damage is cumulative. Every day you swing a hammer, you're wearing down your joints. Your elbows, wrists, shoulders, and spine are taking a beating that never fully heals. By your 30s, you probably have chronic arthritis. Your hands ache constantly. Your fingers are stiff and swollen. Gripping a hammer becomes agony. But you do it anyway because you have no choice. By your 40s, you can barely lift your arms above your head. Tying your shoes is a challenge. And forget about holding a grandchild. Your arms just don't work like that anymore. Your back is another casualty. Years of hunching over an anvil, lifting heavy iron, and standing for 14 hours a day leave your spine bent and twisted. Herniated discs are common. Chronic pain is a given. By the time you're 50, if you make it that long, you're walking with a permanent stoop, shuffling like an old man even though you're barely middle-aged. Then, there are your lungs. We've talked about the smoke and metal dust, but the long-term effects are devastating. Chronic coughing, shortness of breath, constant fatigue. You can't walk up a flight of stairs without stopping to catch your breath. Simple tasks leave you wheezing. And eventually, your lungs just give out. Heart disease is another killer. The constant physical strain puts immense pressure on your cardiovascular system. Medieval people don't understand cholesterol or blood pressure, but they see the results. Blacksmiths drop dead from heart attacks in their 40s and 50s, suddenly and without warning. And let's not forget infections. Every burn, every cut, every scrape is a potential entry point for bacteria. Even minor injuries can turn deadly if they get infected. You develop a fever, the wound swells and turns red, and before you know it, sepsis is setting in. Without antibiotics, your chances are slim. Many blacksmiths die from infections that modern medicine could cure with a simple course of penicillin. Your teeth, or what's left of them, are falling out. Your vision is failing. Your hearing is shot from years of hammering. You're malnourished, exhausted, and in constant pain. And this is, if you're lucky. This is if you avoid the plague, smallpox, dysentery, and all the other diseases that regularly sweep through medieval Europe. So, what's your retirement plan? You don't have one. There's no pension, no social security, no savings account. When you can no longer work, you become dependent on your children, assuming they're still alive and willing to support you. If not, you're left to beg or starve. The truth is, most blacksmiths don't retire. They work until they physically can't anymore, and then they die. Quickly if they're lucky, slowly and painfully if they're not. There's no golden years, no peaceful sunset, just a hard, brutal life that ends in a cold grave. This is the reality of being a medieval blacksmith. You trade your body, your health, and your future for a meager existence, and in the end, all you have to show for it is a pair of ruined hands and a gravestone with your name on it. But let's pull back for a moment and talk about the cultural significance of blacksmiths, because despite all the hardship, danger, and suffering, blacksmiths held a unique place in medieval society. They were respected, even feared, for their craft. There was something almost magical about taking raw metal and transforming it into tools, weapons, and works of art. In many cultures, blacksmiths were seen as possessing secret knowledge. The ability to control fire and shape metal was considered a gift, a skill passed down from the gods themselves. In Norse mythology, the dwarves were master blacksmiths who forged weapons for the gods. In Greek mythology, Hephaestus was the god of blacksmithing, a divine craftsman. This mystical aura gave blacksmiths a certain status. They were essential to society. Without blacksmiths, there would be no plows for farming, no horseshoes for travel, no swords for defense. Kings relied on blacksmiths to arm their soldiers. Farmers relied on them to maintain their tools. Everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest noble, needed a blacksmith at some point. But with that respect came suspicion. In some communities, blacksmiths were viewed with a mix of admiration and fear. They worked with fire, a destructive and uncontrollable force. They created weapons that could kill. Some people believed blacksmiths had dealings with dark forces, that they made pacts with demons to master their craft. This superstition wasn't helped by the fact that smithies were dark, smoky, and filled with strange noises. The clanging of metal, the roar of the forge, the hiss of hot iron plunged into water. It all seemed otherworldly. To outsiders, it looked like the blacksmith was performing some kind of ritual, summoning forces beyond human understanding. In reality, blacksmiths were just trying to make a living. But the mystique surrounding their craft gave them a certain power. A blacksmith could refuse to serve someone, and that refusal carried weight. If the local blacksmith wouldn't make you a knife or repair your plow, you were out of luck. There was no appealing to a higher authority. The blacksmith's word was final. This respect, however, didn't translate into wealth or comfort. A blacksmith might be admired for his skill, but he was still a laborer, still subject to the same taxes and hardships as everyone else. The Lord might need him, but that didn't mean the Lord treated him well. In some ways, being a blacksmith was like being a magician. You had a skill that others didn't understand, and that made you valuable, but it also made you expendable. As long as there was another blacksmith down the road, you could be replaced. Your craft might be respected, but you as an individual were not. So, yes, blacksmiths had status. They had respect. But that respect didn't make their lives easier. It just meant that when they died, people remembered them, if only for a moment, before moving on to the next blacksmith. Now, let's talk about apprentices. Because if you think being a master blacksmith is hard, try being an apprentice. This is where the next generation of blacksmiths learns the trade. And it's a brutal, thankless process that can last for years. Most apprentices start young, around 10 to 12 years old, At an age when modern kids are playing video games and going to school, medieval boys are being sold, yes, sold, into apprenticeships by their parents. The parents pay the master blacksmith a fee, and in return, the boy is bound to the blacksmith for a set period, usually 7 to 10 years. During this time, the apprentice is basically unpaid labor. He doesn't get a salary. He gets food, shelter, and training. That's it. And the food is barely enough to keep him alive. The shelter is a corner of the smithy where he sleeps on a pile of straw. The training consists of doing the worst, most back-breaking tasks while the master takes all the credit. The apprentice's day starts before dawn. He lights the forge, hauls coal, pumps the bellows, and sweeps the floors. He's the one who gets burned because he's clumsy and inexperienced. He's the one who gets yelled at when the master is in a bad mood. He's the one who has to carry heavy iron bars, clean the tools, and scrub the anvil until his hands bleed. And after months, sometimes years of this, the apprentice is finally allowed to touch a hammer. He's taught the basics, how to hold the hammer, how to strike the metal, how to read the color of the iron to know when it's hot enough. But he's not creating masterpieces. He's making nails. Thousands and thousands of nails. It's tedious, repetitive, and mind-numbing, but it teaches him the fundamentals. If the apprentice is lucky, he has a master who's patient and willing to teach, but many masters are harsh, even cruel. They see the apprentice as free labor, not a student. They work him to exhaustion, beat him if he makes a mistake, and show him just enough to keep him useful, but not enough to make him independent. And here's the worst part. Even after years of service, there's no guarantee the apprentice will become a master blacksmith. He has to create a masterpiece, a final test piece that proves his skill to the guild. If it's not good enough, he's stuck as a journeyman, a skilled worker who's still under the control of others. So, the apprentice endures. He endures the burns, the beatings, the exhaustion, all in the hope that one day he'll have his own smithy, his own apprentices, and his own reputation. But the road to that dream is long, painful, and uncertain, and many apprentices never make it. As we near the end of this journey, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. Being a medieval blacksmith wasn't just a job, it was a life sentence, a daily battle against fire, metal, pain, and poverty. And yet, blacksmiths endured. They persisted. They created. Think about what they accomplished. With nothing but raw iron, a forge, and a hammer, they built the tools that shaped civilization, plows that fed nations, swords that defended kingdoms, horseshoes that enabled travel and trade. Every piece of medieval life, from the grandest castle to the humblest farm, relied on the work of blacksmiths. But the cost was staggering. These men, and they were almost always men, sacrificed their bodies, their health, and their futures. They worked in conditions that would be considered inhumane today. No safety regulations, no workers' rights, no retirement plans. Just endless, grinding labor until death. And yet, there's something admirable about their resilience. Blacksmiths didn't have the luxury of quitting. They didn't have the option of changing careers or pursuing their dreams. They were born into a world that demanded their strength, their skill, and their suffering. And they gave it not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Today, when you see a horseshoe hanging on a barn, or a wrought iron gate in front of a historic building, or a medieval sword in a museum, take a moment to think about the man who made it. Think about the burns, the exhaustion, the pain. Think about the years of his life he poured into that single piece of metal. We live in a world of convenience now. We order tools online. We have machines that do the heavy lifting. We have safety equipment, unions, and laws that protect workers. But none of that existed for the medieval blacksmith. He had only his hands, his will, and his stubborn refusal to give up. So, would you survive a single day as a medieval blacksmith? Probably not. And that's okay. Because the men who did survive, the ones who endured decade after decade, weren't just skilled craftsmen. They were survivors, warriors of the forge, and their legacy lives on in every piece of metalwork that has endured through the centuries. As you lie down tonight, in your comfortable bed, with your climate-controlled room and your modern conveniences, spare a thought for the blacksmiths of old, the men who shaped the world with fire and iron, one painful strike at a time. Rest well, knowing that their suffering built the foundation of the world we live in today. Now, let's dive deeper into the specific types of work a blacksmith performed, because it wasn't just about hammering metal randomly. There was an entire hierarchy of projects, from the simple to the impossibly complex, and each one came with its own set of challenges that could break your body or your spirit. Starting with the simplest, nails. You might think, how hard can it be to make a nail? Very hard, actually. Each nail had to be individually forged from a piece of iron rod. You heat the rod, hammer one end flat to create the head, then taper the other end to a point. Sounds simple until you realize you need to make hundreds of them. Thousands, even. A single house might require 10,000 nails. A ship could need 100,000. And each one has to be roughly the same size and shape, or they won't work properly. Your hands blister. Your arms ache. Your vision blurs from staring at the same repetitive task for hours. This is why making nails was usually given to apprentices. It was mind-numbing work that taught basic hammer control while slowly crushing your soul. Then there are horseshoes, a staple of blacksmith work. Every horse needs 4 shoes, and they wear out constantly. You'd think horseshoes would be standardized, but no. Every horse has slightly different sized hooves, so each shoe has to be custom fitted. You heat the iron bar, bend it into a U shape, flatten it, punch holes for the nails, and shape it to match the horse's hoof. And here's the fun part. Fitting the shoe to the horse. You have to work with a farrier, or sometimes you are the farrier, which means dealing with a 1,500-pound animal that doesn't always want to cooperate. Horses kick, horses bite, horses step on your feet with their full weight. One wrong move and you're nursing broken ribs or worse. Next level up. Tools for farmers. Plowshares, sickles, scythes, hoes. These items are essential for agriculture, which means they're in constant demand. A plowshare, the blade that cuts through soil, has to be extremely durable. It hits rocks, roots, and hard-packed earth all day long. If it's not forged correctly, it'll snap on the first day of use. The farmer will be furious, and you'll be out the cost of materials and labor. Scythes are even trickier. The blade has to be thin enough to slice through grain easily, but strong enough not to bend or break. Achieving that balance requires precise control of the metal's temperature and the hammering technique. Too hot, and the metal becomes brittle. Too cold, and it won't shape properly. You're constantly making micro-adjustments, reading the metal like a language most people will never understand. Then, we get into weapons. And this is where things get really serious. Swords, axes, spears, daggers. These aren't just tools. They're instruments of war, and a poorly made weapon can get someone killed. The pressure is immense. Let's talk about forging a sword, because this is the pinnacle of blacksmithing skill. A sword isn't just a sharpened piece of metal. It's a carefully balanced, precisely tempered weapon that has to be both flexible and hard. If it's too hard, it'll shatter on impact. If it's too soft, it'll bend and become useless. The process takes days, sometimes weeks. You start with high-quality steel if you can afford it, or layered iron if you can't. You heat it, fold it, hammer it, heat it again. This process, called pattern welding, creates layers of metal that give the blade strength and flexibility. Each fold requires perfect temperature control and precise hammering. One mistake and the whole blade is ruined. After shaping the blade, you have to temper it. This involves heating it to a specific temperature, then quenching it rapidly in water or oil. The quenching hardens the steel, but if you do it wrong, the blade can warp, crack, or shatter. Many a blacksmith has spent days on a blade only to have it break during quenching. Heartbreaking doesn't begin to describe it. Then comes the grinding and sharpening, which is a whole other level of tedious. You work the blade against a grindstone for hours, creating an edge sharp enough to cut through flesh and bone. Your arms burn from the repetitive motion. Metal dust gets in your eyes, your nose, your lungs. But you keep going, because a dull sword is a death sentence for the warrior who wields it. Finally, you fit the blade with a handle or hilt. This requires woodworking skills, leatherworking skills, and sometimes metalworking for the crossguard and pommel. Every component has to be perfectly balanced. A sword that's too heavy in the blade tires the arm quickly. Too heavy in the handle, and it's awkward to swing. Finding that perfect balance is an art form. And after all that work, after pouring days or weeks of your life into creating this weapon, you hand it to a knight or soldier who might break it in the first battle. No refunds, no replacements, just the hope that he'll come back and order another one. Now let's talk about armor, because if you think swords are difficult, try making a full suit of plate armor. This is the Mount Everest of blacksmithing, a project that requires not just skill but immense patience and physical endurance. A full suit of armor consists of dozens of individual pieces: helmet, breastplate, backplate, pauldrons for the shoulders, rear braces and vambraces for the arms, gauntlets for the hands, cuisses and greaves for the legs, sabatons for the feet. Each piece has to be individually shaped, fitted, and articulated so the wearer can move. Let's focus on just one piece, the breastplate. This is a large, curved piece of metal designed to protect the torso. It has to be thick enough to stop a sword or arrow, but light enough that the wearer doesn't collapse from exhaustion. Achieving this balance requires premium steel and expert craftsmanship. You start with a large, flat piece of steel. You heat it in sections, hammering it over a rounded anvil or form to create the curve. But here's the problem. Steel doesn't want to curve. It wants to stay flat. So you're fighting the metal every step of the way, hammering, heating, checking the fit against a wooden form or mannequin, then hammering some more. One section might take an entire day. And if you make a mistake, if the curve is wrong or the metal cracks, you have to start over. The frustration is maddening. You're covered in sweat, your arms are shaking, and the metal is mocking you with its refusal to cooperate. Once the breastplate is shaped, you have to smooth it, polish it, and add attachment points for straps and buckles. Then you move on to the next piece and repeat the process. A full suit of armor can take months to complete, and the entire time, you're balancing multiple orders, dealing with demanding clients, and trying not to go bankrupt from the cost of materials. And here's the final insult. The knight wearing your masterpiece will probably never thank you. He'll take the armor, pay you a fraction of what it's worth, and ride off to war. If he dies, the armor might be looted, and you'll never see credit for your work. If he survives, he'll demand repairs for the dents and dings, and you'll be expected to fix them for free or a minimal fee. Let's shift to another aspect of blacksmithing that often gets overlooked: decorative work. Because not everything a blacksmith makes is purely functional. There's also ornamental ironwork, intricate pieces that require artistic skill as well as technical knowledge. Think about the gates you see on old castles or churches, the elaborate scrollwork, the twisted bars, the decorative finials. That's all handmade by a blacksmith. Creating those requires a completely different set of skills. Instead of raw power, you need precision and patience. Instead of speed, you need artistry. Decorative ironwork starts with heating small pieces of iron until they're glowing and malleable. Then, using specialized tools like scrolling forks and bending jigs, you shape the metal into curves, spirals, and loops. It's delicate work. One wrong twist, and the piece is ruined. One moment of inattention, and you burn yourself. Then there's inlay work, where you embed other metals like copper or silver into iron to create patterns or designs. This requires cutting grooves into the iron, heating the secondary metal until it's soft, then hammering it into place. It's painstaking, and the results are often stunning, but the process is slow and demands absolute focus. And here's the thing: decorative work doesn't pay as well as practical items. A farmer will pay good money for a plow because he needs it to survive. A noble might commission ornamental gates, but he'll haggle over the price and take months to pay. So, you're spending more time and energy on a project that earns you less money. But you do it anyway because your reputation depends on versatility. A blacksmith who can only make horseshoes is replaceable. A blacksmith who can create art is remembered. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you. The blacksmith's relationship with the community. Because despite all the hardship, blacksmiths were central figures in medieval villages and towns. They weren't just craftsmen. They were problem solvers, fixers, and sometimes even mediators in disputes. When a farmer's plow broke in the middle of planting season, who did he run to? The blacksmith. When a merchant's cartwheel lost its iron rim, who fixed it? The blacksmith. When the town needed a new church bell hanger or a set of hinges for the Lord's gates, who got called? The blacksmith. You were the go-to person for anything involving metal, which meant you were constantly in demand and constantly under pressure. But this centrality also gave you a certain power. You knew everyone in the community. You heard all the gossip, all the complaints, all the secrets. The merchant griping about the Lord's taxes. The farmer worried about his failing crops. The soldier boasting about his conquests. You were like a medieval therapist, listening to everyone's problems while you hammered away at your work. Sometimes people came to you for advice. Should I plant wheat or barley this year? What's the best way to sharpen this knife? Is the Lord planning something? You weren't expected to have all the answers, but people valued your opinion because you were seen as wise, practical, and honest. This trust was both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, it meant people respected you and your work. On the other hand, it meant you couldn't afford to make mistakes. If you gave bad advice, or if a tool you made failed at a critical moment, the whole community would know. Your reputation could be destroyed overnight. And there was always the risk of being caught in the middle of conflicts. Let's say two farmers are arguing over a boundary line. One of them asks you to make a new fence post. The other accuses you of taking sides. Suddenly, you're involved in a dispute that has nothing to do with you. And no matter what you do, someone's going to be angry. Or imagine the Lord orders you to make weapons for his soldiers, but you know those weapons will be used to suppress a rebellion by your neighbors. Do you refuse and risk the Lord's wrath? Or do you comply and become complicit in violence against your own community? These weren't hypothetical dilemmas. They were real choices that blacksmiths faced, and there were no easy answers. Despite all this, many blacksmiths took pride in their role. They knew they were essential. They knew their work mattered. And in a world where most people had very little control over their lives, being able to create something, to take raw metal and turn it into a tool or a work of art, was deeply satisfying. Now, let's get into something that's both fascinating and terrifying. The science of metallurgy, as understood by medieval blacksmiths. Because these men didn't have chemistry textbooks or material science degrees, they learned through trial, error, and generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through apprenticeships. Understanding metal was crucial. Iron comes in different grades, and not all iron is created equal. Some iron ore is pure and easy to work with. Other ore is contaminated with sulfur or phosphorus, which makes the metal brittle and prone to cracking. A blacksmith had to be able to judge the quality of his materials just by looking at them, feeling them, and working with them. Then there's the difference between iron and steel. Iron is relatively soft and malleable. Steel, which is iron with a small amount of carbon added, is much harder and holds an edge better. But making steel in medieval times was incredibly difficult. You couldn't just add carbon like a recipe. You had to heat iron in a bed of charcoal for hours, allowing the carbon to slowly diffuse into the metal. Too little carbon, and it's still just iron. Too much, and it becomes brittle cast iron, useless for most applications. Then there's the art of quenching, which we touched on earlier but deserves more explanation. When you heat steel and then cool it rapidly, the sudden temperature change alters the metal's crystalline structure, making it harder. But the method of quenching matters enormously. Water quenching is fast and creates very hard steel, but it's also risky. The rapid cooling can cause the metal to crack or warp. Oil quenching is slower and gentler, producing tougher steel that's less likely to shatter. Some blacksmiths had secret quenching recipes, adding salt, urine, animal fat, or even blood to the quenching liquid. Did these additives actually change the metal's properties? Sometimes, Yes. Urine, for example, contains urea, which can alter the cooling rate and improve hardness. Temperature control was another critical skill. Medieval blacksmiths didn't have thermometers. They judged temperature by color. A dull red meant the metal was around 900 degrees Fahrenheit, suitable for gentle shaping. A bright cherry red indicated 1200 degrees, good for heavy forging. A yellow-white glow meant over 2000 degrees, approaching the melting point. Reading these colors required keen eyesight and years of experience. Work in a bright smithy and the colors are harder to see. Work at night and they're clearer. Many blacksmiths preferred to forge in dim light because it made temperature judgments more accurate. And let's not forget about the different types of metals beyond iron and steel: copper, bronze, brass, tin, lead. Each one has unique properties and requires different techniques. Copper is soft and melts at a relatively low temperature, making it easier to work with, but less useful for tools and weapons. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, is harder and was the primary metal for weapons before iron became widespread. Blacksmiths who worked with multiple metals were particularly valuable. They could repair bronze church bells, create copper cooking pots, or cast lead weights for merchants. But each metal required its own set of skills, its own temperature ranges, its own quirks. Learning to work with one metal took years. Mastering multiple metals took a lifetime. And then there's the mystery of Damascus steel, a legendary material known for its distinctive wavy patterns and exceptional sharpness. Medieval European blacksmiths heard rumors of this eastern steel but didn't know how to make it. The secret involved layering different types of steel and iron, folding them repeatedly to create hundreds or even thousands of layers. The process required incredible skill and patience, and the exact techniques were closely guarded secrets. Some blacksmiths spent their entire lives trying to recreate Damascus steel, experimenting with different ores, forging techniques, and heat treatments. A few succeeded, most failed. But the pursuit of perfection, the desire to push the boundaries of what was possible with metal, drove innovation and kept the craft alive. Let's now talk about one of the most dangerous aspects of blacksmithing: dealing with the forge itself. Because this isn't just a fire, it's a controlled inferno that can kill you in multiple ways if you're not careful. The forge is typically a stone or brick structure with a hearth at the center. In the hearth you burn coal or charcoal with a bellows or tuyere blowing air into the base to increase the temperature. The fire can reach over 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt iron, and certainly hot enough to kill a human in seconds. One of the biggest dangers is carbon monoxide poisoning. When coal burns in an enclosed space without proper ventilation, it produces carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless gas that's deadly in high concentrations. Symptoms include dizziness, confusion, nausea, and eventually unconsciousness and death. Many blacksmiths worked in poorly ventilated spaces, especially in winter when keeping the doors closed preserved heat. It's likely that some blacksmiths died from carbon monoxide poisoning without anyone realizing what had happened. Then there's the risk of explosions. If water gets into the hearth while the forge is extremely hot, it can flash into steam instantly, causing a violent explosion that sends hot coals and metal fragments flying. A blacksmith reaching for a tool might accidentally knock over a water bucket. A leaky roof might drip water into the forge during a rainstorm. These accidents, while rare, were catastrophic. Coal dust itself is explosive under the right conditions. If a thick cloud of coal dust is ignited by a spark, it can create a fireball that engulfs the entire smithy. Blacksmiths learned to keep their coal stored in covered containers and to sweep up dust regularly, but accidents still happened. And let's not forget about the bellows. This is the device that pumps air into the forge, and it's usually operated by hand or foot. It's exhausting work, pumping constantly to keep the fire hot enough. But the bellows can also malfunction. The leather can tear. The wooden frame can crack. Or the air valve can stick. If the bellows fails in the middle of a job, you have to stop everything and repair it, losing hours of work. Some smithies used water-powered bellows, with a water wheel driving a mechanical pump. This was much more efficient, but also more dangerous. The machinery could catch clothing or fingers, crushing bones or severing limbs. There were no safety guards, no emergency stop buttons. If you got caught in the mechanism, you were on your own. The forge itself could deteriorate over time. The bricks cracked from thermal stress. The mortar crumbled. Eventually, the whole structure could collapse, dumping hot coals and potentially trapping the blacksmith underneath. Rebuilding a forge was a major undertaking, requiring days of labor and significant expense, but it had to be done because without a functional forge, you couldn't work. Let's shift focus to another brutal reality: the weather. We've touched on this before, but it bears repeating because the weather didn't just affect your comfort. It affected your ability to work and therefore your ability to survive. In summer, the smithy becomes unbearable. You're already standing next to a 2,000-degree fire. Add 90-degree heat and high humidity, and you have a recipe for heat stroke. Dehydration is a constant threat. You sweat so much that you can't drink enough water to keep up. Your head pounds. Your vision blurs. You feel dizzy and nauseous. But you keep working because the orders don't stop just because it's hot. Medieval blacksmiths didn't understand electrolytes, but they knew instinctively that they needed salt. Many would sprinkle extra salt on their food or drink salted broth to replace what they lost through sweat. It helped, but not enough. Heat-related illnesses were common, and many blacksmiths collapsed from exhaustion during the hottest months. In winter, the opposite problem occurred. The forge kept you warm while you were working, but the moment you stepped away, the cold hit like a hammer. Your sweat-soaked clothes froze against your skin. Your wet hands stuck to metal tools. Frostbite was a real risk, especially for fingers and toes. And working with cold metal is harder. Iron and steel lose heat quickly in winter air, which means you have less time to shape them before they cool down and become unworkable. You end up reheating the metal more often, which means more coal consumption, higher costs, and more time spent on each piece. Rain presented its own challenges. Water and forges don't mix well, as we've discussed. But rain also made the dirt floor of the smithy muddy and slippery. Carrying heavy pieces of metal across a slick surface was treacherous. One slip and you could drop 100 pounds of iron on your foot. Or worse, fall into the forge itself. Snow and ice were even worse. The cold seeped into your bones. Your fingers became numb and clumsy. Simple tasks like gripping a hammer or holding tongs became difficult. Accidents increased in winter because your body wasn't responding the way it should. And then there were storms. Lightning could strike the smithy, especially if it was the tallest structure around. Fire from a lightning strike could destroy everything: your tools, your materials, your home if you lived above the shop. There was no insurance, no disaster relief. If you lost everything, you started over from nothing, assuming you survived. Wind was another enemy. Strong gusts could blow embers out of the forge, starting fires elsewhere in the smithy. They could also disrupt the airflow, making it hard to maintain the right temperature. And in extreme cases, wind could knock over your anvil stand or scatter your tools. Medieval blacksmiths were at the mercy of nature. There was no climate control, no weatherproof buildings, no modern conveniences. You adapted, or you died. And many didn't adapt quickly enough. Let's talk about something deeply personal: the physical transformation that happens to a blacksmith's body over years of work. Because this job doesn't just tire you out, it reshapes you, often in disturbing ways. First, your hands. Within the first few years, your palms develop calluses so thick they feel like leather. These calluses are necessary. They're your only protection against the heat and abrasion of your work. But they also make it hard to feel anything. You lose fine motor control. Simple tasks like buttoning a shirt or holding a pen become difficult. Your fingers curl into permanent claws from gripping hammers and tongs for decades. Even when you're resting, your hands stay partially closed. Arthritis sets in early, usually by your 30s. Your knuckles swell and ache constantly. On cold mornings, you have to soak your hands in warm water just to get them moving. Then there are the burns. Scars cover your forearms, hands, and sometimes your face and neck. Each scar tells a story. The time a piece of hot iron slipped from your tongs. The day a spark landed in your eye. The moment you grabbed the wrong end of a tool. Your skin becomes a patchwork of old injuries, some healed smooth, others raised and angry. Your shoulders and upper back develop disproportionately. Years of swinging hammers build muscle, but it's not the balanced, aesthetic muscle of an athlete. It's thick, knotted, and asymmetrical. Your dominant arm is noticeably larger than the other. Your shoulder blades jut out unnaturally. You look deformed, and in a way, you are. Your spine curves from hunching over the anvil. By your 40s, you have a permanent stoop. Standing up straight becomes painful, sometimes impossible. You shuffle when you walk, your back unable to support you properly. Friends and family watch you age decades faster than normal people. Your hearing goes next. The constant ringing of metal on metal damages the tiny bones in your inner ear. By your 50s, you're partially deaf. People have to shout for you to hear them. Conversations become exhausting because you're constantly asking people to repeat themselves. Social isolation sets in. It's easier to just stay in your smithy, surrounded by the noise that caused your deafness in the first place. Your lungs darken with soot and metal dust. You cough constantly, bringing up black phlegm. Breathing becomes labored. Climbing stairs leaves you wheezing. By your 60s, if you even make it that far, you're practically an invalid, struggling to take each breath. Your teeth, what's left of them, are ground down and discolored. Years of breathing through your mouth to avoid the smoke have dried out your gums, leading to infections and tooth loss. Eating becomes difficult. You live on soft foods, porridge, stew, bread soaked in broth. And then there are the invisible changes. Your brain has absorbed years of carbon monoxide exposure, lead from working with certain metals and other toxins. You become forgetful, confused, sometimes irrational. People whisper that old so-and-so the blacksmith has lost his wits. They don't understand that your mind is failing because of the work that kept them all supplied with tools and weapons. Your body becomes a monument to your craft, but not a proud one. It's a warning, a testament to the cost of survival in medieval times. Every scar, every ache, every labored breath is a price paid for the privilege of eating another day. Now, let's examine the economic reality of being a blacksmith, because despite being essential to society, most blacksmiths lived just above the poverty line. Let's break down the math of survival. A master blacksmith in a decent-sized town might earn anywhere from 30 to 60 pence per week, depending on the volume of work and the quality of his reputation. That sounds like a reasonable income until you start subtracting expenses. First, there's the cost of materials. Iron ore, when you can get it, is expensive. A pound of decent iron might cost 3 to 5 pence. A single sword requires roughly 5 pounds of iron, so that's 15 to 25 pence right there, before you've even started working. And that's assuming the iron is good quality. If it's impure, you might need even more to account for waste. Coal or charcoal, your fuel source, is another major expense. You burn through vast quantities keeping the forge hot. A week's supply might cost 5 to 10 pence. In winter, when you need to work longer hours under artificial light and keep the smithy warm, that cost doubles. Then there are tools. We've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Tools wear out and need to be replaced or repaired constantly. Set aside a few pence each week for tool maintenance, or you'll be caught short when your favorite hammer breaks. Rent is another killer. Unless you own your smithy outright, which most blacksmiths don't, you're paying rent to the local lord or a landlord. This could be anywhere from 5 to 20 pence per week, depending on the location and size of the space. Taxes, as we've discussed, take another chunk. Between royal taxes, church tithes, and guild fees, you're losing a quarter to a third of your income before you even see it. Now, let's talk about food for your family. If you have a wife and 2 children, you need to feed 4 people. Bread alone costs a penny or 2 per day for a family of 4. Add in occasional meat, cheese, vegetables, and the ale everyone drinks because water is unsafe. And you're spending 10 to 15 pence per week on food. More if times are hard and prices rise. Clothing is another cost. Your work clothes are constantly being destroyed by sparks, sweat, and heavy use. You need new tunics, aprons, and shoes regularly. That's another few pence per month. Medical expenses can devastate you. If you or a family member gets sick or injured seriously, a visit to a physician or surgeon can cost a week's wages. Medicines, herbal remedies, and treatments add up quickly. Let's do the math. If you earn 50 pence per week and you subtract 20 pence for materials and fuel, 10 pence for rent, 5 pence for taxes, 15 pence for food, and a few pence for tools and clothing, you're left with almost nothing. Maybe a penny or two, if you're lucky. That's your savings, your emergency fund, your retirement plan. One bad week, one slow month, one major injury, and you're in debt. And medieval debt is a trap. There are no bankruptcy protections, no social safety nets. If you can't pay, your tools get seized. Your home gets taken. You end up working for someone else, essentially a wage slave, trying to pay off a debt that keeps growing because of interest. Some blacksmiths tried to supplement their income by taking on side work, repairing household items, sharpening knives, doing small jobs for neighbors. But there are only so many hours in a day, and your body can only take so much abuse. The harsh reality is that most blacksmiths never get ahead. They work their entire lives, and at the end, they have nothing to show for it except broken bodies and children who are likely to follow the same path. Let's talk about the social hierarchy within the blacksmithing profession, because not all blacksmiths are equal. There's a pecking order, and where you fall determines your income, your respect, and your quality of life. At the bottom are the apprentices, as we've discussed. They're essentially slaves, bound to their masters for years, learning the trade through brutal labor and occasional instruction. They have no rights, no income, and no freedom. Next up are the journeymen. These are blacksmiths who've completed their apprenticeships and passed their tests, but haven't yet established their own shops. They travel from town to town, looking for work. Sometimes they're hired by master blacksmiths to help with large orders. Other times they do odd jobs for whoever will pay them. It's an uncertain existence, and many journeymen never advance beyond this stage. Then, there are the master blacksmiths, those who own their own shops and are members of the guild. This is the goal, the dream. But even among masters, there's a hierarchy. At the lower end are the village blacksmiths, working in small communities, doing basic repairs and simple projects. They earn enough to survive, but barely. They're one bad harvest away from destitution. In the middle are the town blacksmiths, who have more customers and more diverse projects. They make weapons, tools, hardware, and occasionally decorative items. They earn a decent living, though they're far from wealthy. At the top are the specialty blacksmiths, those who work exclusively for nobles or royalty. Swordsmiths, armorers, and master craftsmen who create pieces of exceptional quality. These blacksmiths can command high prices and live relatively comfortable lives, but there are very few of them, and the competition for those positions is fierce. Then there's the matter of reputation. In medieval times, your reputation is everything. A blacksmith known for quality work can charge premium prices and have a waiting list of customers. A blacksmith with a reputation for shoddy work struggles to find any customers at all. Building a reputation takes years, sometimes decades. You have to consistently produce excellent work, meet deadlines, and treat customers fairly. But a single mistake, one broken sword, one plow that fails at a critical moment, can destroy that reputation overnight. And here's the cruel part. Your reputation isn't just about your skill. It's also about politics and who you know. A blacksmith who's friends with the local lord or has connections to wealthy merchants has a huge advantage. They get the best orders, the highest pay, and the most security. A blacksmith without those connections, no matter how skilled, struggles. Social mobility is almost non-existent. If you're born into a blacksmithing family, you'll likely die a blacksmith. If you're lucky and talented, maybe you'll move up from village smithy to town smithy. But leaping from town smithy to royal armorer? That almost never happens. The guild system reinforces this hierarchy. Guilds control who can practice the trade, who can open a shop, and who gets access to the best materials and customers. If you're not in the guild's good graces, you're shut out. And getting into the guild requires money, connections, and years of proving yourself. So, yes, being a master blacksmith is better than being an apprentice. But for most blacksmiths, it's still a life of hard work, constant pressure, and very little reward. Finally, let's end with something important: the legacy of medieval blacksmiths. Because despite all the suffering, despite the poverty and pain and early deaths, these men created something that lasted. Their work didn't just serve their own time, it shaped the future. Think about the tools they made. Plows that allowed agriculture to expand, feeding growing populations. Horseshoes that enabled transportation and trade, connecting distant communities. Weapons that defended kingdoms and decided the outcomes of wars. Every major development in medieval society depended in some way on the work of blacksmiths. And beyond the practical, there was the artistry, the decorative ironwork on cathedrals, the intricate designs on swords and armor, the beauty hidden in everyday objects. Medieval blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen. They were artists, expressing creativity and skill through metal. Their knowledge, passed down through generations of apprentices, formed the foundation of modern metallurgy. The techniques they developed through trial and error, forging, tempering, alloying, are still used today, refined by science, but rooted in the same principles. When you see a piece of medieval metalwork in a museum, or an old iron gate on a historic building, or a sword from a long-ago battle, you're seeing the legacy of a blacksmith, someone who worked in pain, in poverty, in obscurity, but who created something that outlasted them by centuries. These men didn't do it for glory. They did it because they had no choice. But in doing it, they built the world we live in today. Every modern tool, every machine, every piece of technology that involves metal owes a debt to those medieval blacksmiths who stood at their forges, hammering away in the heat and smoke, creating the future one strike at a time. So tonight, as you rest in comfort, as you enjoy the fruits of modern technology and convenience, remember them, the nameless, countless blacksmiths who gave their bodies, their health, and their lives to forge the world. They wouldn't survive in our world, and we certainly wouldn't survive in theirs. But their work endures, a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the refusal to give up, no matter how hard life becomes. Rest well, knowing that their hammers fell so that ours could rest. But wait, we're not quite done. Because there's another aspect of blacksmithing life that deserves exploration: the superstitions and beliefs surrounding the craft. In medieval times, when science was barely understood and religion permeated every aspect of life, blacksmiths occupied a strange space between the practical and the mystical. Fire was seen as a divine element, a gift from God, but also dangerous and unpredictable. The ability to control fire, to bend it to your will and use it to transform metal, was viewed with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Some people believed blacksmiths had made deals with the devil to gain their power over flames. This wasn't helped by the appearance of smithies, dark, smoke-filled spaces where flames roared and metal glowed red-hot. They looked like something out of hell itself. The blacksmith, covered in soot and sweat, his face lit by the forge's glow, resembled a demon more than a craftsman. Many blacksmiths leaned into this mystique. They developed rituals and incantations that they claimed helped their work. Some would whisper prayers while quenching a blade. Others would mark their tools with religious symbols or hang horseshoes over the door for luck. Were these practices effective? Probably not, but they gave the blacksmith an air of mystery that could be useful. Customers sometimes came to blacksmiths not just for metalwork, but for charms and talismans. A horseshoe was believed to bring good luck and ward off evil spirits. An iron nail driven into a doorframe could protect against witches. Blacksmiths sold these items at a premium, knowing that people would pay extra for perceived magical protection. Some blacksmiths went further, claiming to have special knowledge or abilities. They might offer to forge a blade under the right stars, or use secret techniques passed down from ancient times. Most of this was showmanship, but it worked. A sword made with ritual and ceremony could command twice the price of a standard blade, even if there was no actual difference in quality. The church had a complicated relationship with blacksmiths. On one hand, they were necessary. Churches needed iron hinges, nails for construction, and bells hung from iron frames. On the other hand, the association with fire and the quasi-magical reputation made clergy nervous. Some priests preached against consulting blacksmiths for anything other than metalwork, warning that it could be sinful. But blacksmiths were also called upon to make religious items: iron crosses, candle holders, even the chains and locks for reliquaries. Creating these sacred objects required ritual purity. A blacksmith making a cross might fast beforehand, attend confession, and work only while reciting prayers. The finished product wasn't just a piece of metal. It was considered blessed, imbued with spiritual power. There were also specific patron saints for blacksmiths. Saint Eligius, also known as Saint Eloi, was a goldsmith and blacksmith who became a bishop. He was invoked for protection against workplace accidents and for skill in the craft. Many smithies had a small shrine to Saint Eligius, and blacksmiths would pray to him before starting difficult projects. Another patron was Saint Dunstan, who, according to legend, once grabbed the devil by the nose with a pair of hot tongs when Satan tried to tempt him. This story made Dunstan a hero among blacksmiths, a saint who literally used their tools to fight evil. Superstitions extended to the work itself. Some blacksmiths believed that certain days were unlucky for forging. Working on Good Friday, for example, was thought to curse any blade made that day. Others believed that a blade quenched during a full moon would be stronger, or that iron forged during a thunderstorm would have special properties. Were these beliefs true? Almost certainly not. But in a world where so much was uncertain and unexplained, these rituals provided comfort and a sense of control. If your blade broke, it wasn't because you made a mistake. It was because you forged it on an unlucky day. If your work turned out exceptionally well, it was because you followed the old traditions. This blend of craft and mysticism gave blacksmiths a unique position in medieval society. They were practical, necessary, but also slightly dangerous and mysterious. People needed them, respected them, but also kept a wary distance. It was a complex relationship that defined much of the blacksmith's social experience. Now let's dive into the role of women in blacksmithing, because while the craft was overwhelmingly male-dominated, women weren't entirely absent. Their role, however, was complicated, limited, and often invisible in historical records. First, let's be clear. Women almost never worked the forge itself. The physical demands, the social stigma, and guild regulations all conspired to keep women out of the actual smithing work. But that doesn't mean they weren't involved in the business. Many blacksmith shops were family operations. The blacksmith's wife often managed the finances, dealt with customers, and handled the day-to-day business operations. She kept the books, collected payments, negotiated prices, and made sure the household ran smoothly. Without her, the smithy would have collapsed into chaos. She also did the women's work that made the blacksmith's life possible. Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, caring for children, all while the blacksmith focused on forging. This labor was essential but unpaid and unrecognized. A blacksmith couldn't work 14-hour days if he also had to cook meals and raise children. His wife's work freed him to focus on the craft. In some cases, widows inherited their husbands' smithies and continued the business. They couldn't do the forging themselves, but they hired journeymen and apprentices to do the physical work while they managed the operation. Some of these women became quite successful, running profitable enterprises and maintaining their late husband's reputation. There are rare documented cases of women learning to forge. Usually this happened when a blacksmith had no sons, only daughters, and one daughter showed interest and aptitude. The father, desperate to pass on his knowledge and keep the family business alive, would teach her the craft in secret, away from the prying eyes of the guild. These female blacksmiths had to hide their work. If the guild found out, she could be banned from practicing, fined, or even run out of town. So she worked quietly, often claiming that the actual forging was done by an apprentice or journeyman while she just managed the business. But those who knew the truth understood she was the real craftsman. The physical demands made this even harder for women. Medieval sexism aside, the reality is that swinging a 10-pound hammer for hours requires significant upper body strength. Women generally have less muscle mass than men, which made the work more difficult, but not impossible. Some women developed the strength through years of practice, building muscle and endurance. The social stigma, however, was often insurmountable. A woman doing men's work was seen as unnatural, possibly sinful. Neighbors gossiped. Clergy preached against it. Even customers might refuse to buy from a female blacksmith, believing her work was inferior simply because of her gender. Despite these obstacles, women found ways to contribute to the craft. They passed on knowledge, managed businesses, and in rare cases worked the forge themselves. Their contributions are largely forgotten, buried under centuries of male-dominated historical records, but they were there, quietly shaping metal and defying expectations. Let's shift to another fascinating topic: the relationship between blacksmiths and warfare. Because when kingdoms went to war, blacksmiths became some of the most important and most vulnerable people in society. Armies need weapons, lots of them: swords, spears, axes, arrowheads, armor, horseshoes, nails for siege engines, chains, locks, and countless other metal items. A single military campaign could require months of preparation, and blacksmiths were at the center of it all. When a king declared war, blacksmiths received orders, often with impossible deadlines. The king needs 1,000 swords in 3 months. You and every other blacksmith in the kingdom are expected to contribute. You drop everything else, cancel other orders, and focus entirely on weapons production. Your life becomes a blur of forging, hammering, sharpening. The pay for military contracts was usually decent, assuming you got paid at all. Kings had a bad habit of issuing promises instead of coin, and when the war was over and the king was broke, those promises often went unfulfilled. Blacksmiths who relied on military work sometimes found themselves destitute when the payments never came. But the real danger was being on the losing side. If your kingdom lost the war, enemy soldiers might target blacksmiths specifically. Why? Because blacksmiths could make weapons for future rebellions. Better to kill them or take them captive and force them to work for the conquerors. During sieges, blacksmiths were essential. They repaired broken weapons, made new arrows, fixed armor, and kept the defenders' equipment functional. But they were also prime targets. Attackers knew that destroying the forge or killing the blacksmiths would cripple the defenders' ability to fight. Some blacksmiths were forced into military service, not as soldiers, but as army blacksmiths, traveling with the troops and setting up temporary forges in the field. This was brutal work. You had to transport your tools, set up a forge in unfamiliar territory, work under battle conditions, and constantly move as the army advanced or retreated. Field forges were crude affairs: a pit dug in the ground, some scavenged stones, and whatever fuel you could find. The work was the same, but everything else was worse. No shelter from the weather, no safety, constant danger from enemy raids. Many army blacksmiths died from disease, accidents, or combat, and when the battle was over, blacksmiths were called upon to salvage. Battlefields were littered with broken weapons and armor. All that metal could be collected, melted down, and reforged. It was grim work, sorting through the remains of the dead, pulling swords from corpses, collecting arrows that had ended lives just hours before. Some blacksmiths refused military work on moral grounds. They didn't want to contribute to killing, but refusing a king's order was dangerous, potentially fatal. So they complied, forging weapons they knew would be used to take lives, and lived with the guilt. Others embraced the work. War meant steady employment and good money. Moral qualms were a luxury they couldn't afford. They told themselves they were just doing their job, that someone else would make the weapons if they didn't. Maybe they even believed it. Warfare shaped the blacksmithing profession in profound ways. Techniques for making stronger, sharper weapons drove innovation. The demand for large quantities of metal items led to more efficient production methods. The relationship between blacksmiths and military power became so intertwined that in some ways, blacksmiths were as responsible for the outcome of wars as the soldiers who fought them. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you: the blacksmith's connection to medicine. Because in medieval times, the line between craftsman and healer was blurry, and blacksmiths sometimes found themselves called upon to perform medical procedures. We've mentioned barber surgeons, but blacksmiths also did a kind of rough surgery, particularly on animals. A horse with a cracked hoof, a cow with an infected leg, a dog with an embedded thorn. The local blacksmith was often the one people called. After all, he worked with animals regularly for horseshoeing, and he had the tools, knives, hot irons, clamps, that could be used for medical purposes. Cauterizing wounds was a common procedure. A deep cut that wouldn't stop bleeding could be sealed by pressing a red-hot iron against it. The flesh would sear, the blood vessels would close, and the bleeding would stop. It was agonizing, but it worked. Blacksmiths, accustomed to handling hot iron, were the ones who did this. They also pulled teeth. If a farmer had a rotten tooth causing unbearable pain, and the barber surgeon was too expensive or too far away, the blacksmith might step in. Using pliers designed for gripping metal, he'd grab the tooth and yank. No anesthesia, no finesse, just brutal, effective removal. Setting broken bones was another task. If someone broke an arm or leg, you needed someone strong enough to pull the limb straight and hold it while it was splinted. Blacksmiths had the necessary strength and weren't squeamish about causing pain in the process. There was also the matter of creating medical tools. Surgeons needed scalpels, saws for amputations, forceps, and other instruments. Blacksmiths made these tools, often custom designed based on the surgeon's specifications. In doing so, they learned about anatomy and medical procedures, knowledge that sometimes came in handy. Some blacksmiths developed reputations as healers. They might create ointments from animal fat and herbs to treat burns, since they dealt with burns constantly and knew what worked. Or they'd recommend iron-rich foods for people who seemed weak and pale, recognizing what we now call anemia. This medical role was unofficial and unregulated. A blacksmith practicing medicine did so at his own risk. If the patient recovered, he was a hero. If the patient died, he could be blamed, sued, or even prosecuted. But in rural areas where trained physicians were scarce, people took what help they could get. There was also a belief, rooted in superstition, that blacksmith's water had healing properties. This was the water used to quench hot metal, and people believed it absorbed special qualities from the forging process. Some sought it out as a cure for various ailments. Did it work? No. But the placebo effect was real. The connection between metalworking and medicine might seem strange to us now, but in medieval times, both involved working with physical matter, understanding materials, and having a tolerance for blood and pain. In a world where specialization was limited and people wore multiple hats, it made sense that the village blacksmith might also be the person you called when you broke your leg or needed a tooth pulled. Let's explore another dimension: the environmental impact of medieval blacksmithing. We don't usually think of medieval industries as having environmental consequences, but they did, and blacksmiths were significant contributors. First, there's deforestation. Blacksmithing requires massive amounts of fuel. While some smithies used coal, many relied on charcoal, which is made by burning wood in a low oxygen environment. Producing enough charcoal to keep a forge running meant cutting down trees constantly. In areas with active blacksmithing communities, forests were cleared at alarming rates. This led to timber shortages, which drove up the price of charcoal and made blacksmithing more expensive. It also caused environmental degradation, soil erosion, loss of wildlife habitat, and changes to local climates. Some regions implemented forest management laws to prevent total deforestation, but enforcement was spotty. Blacksmiths, desperate for fuel, sometimes illegally cut trees from protected forests, risking fines or imprisonment. The need for fuel was so great that it drove a kind of medieval resource crisis. Mining for iron ore had its own environmental costs. Ore was dug from open pits or underground mines, leaving scars on the landscape. The ore processing produced waste rock and tailings that were often dumped into rivers, contaminating water supplies and killing fish. Smelting, the process of extracting iron from ore, released toxic fumes. Sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and other pollutants filled the air around smelting sites. People living downwind suffered respiratory problems, and the land itself could become poisoned, unable to support plant life. Blacksmithing also produced waste. Slag, the byproduct of smelting and forging, accumulated in massive piles around smithies. This material was mostly useless, though some of it was used for road construction. Metal shavings, broken tools, and failed projects added to the waste. Water pollution was another issue. Quenching hot metal in water heated the water to near boiling temperatures and introduced metal particles and chemicals. If this water was dumped into a stream or river, it could harm aquatic life and contaminate drinking water downstream. The environmental impact of a single blacksmith might seem small, but multiply it by thousands of smithies across Europe, all burning fuel, producing slag and polluting water, and you start to see a significant problem. Medieval people didn't think in terms of environmentalism, but they noticed the effects. Fewer trees, dirtier water, more polluted air. Some communities tried to mitigate the damage. Smithies were built on the outskirts of towns to keep smoke and noise away from residential areas. Waste disposal regulations required slag to be piled in designated areas rather than dumped randomly. But these were minor measures that barely addressed the underlying issues. In the end, the environmental cost of blacksmithing was just another price paid for progress. The tools, weapons, and goods created by blacksmiths were essential, and no one was willing to give them up, even if it meant polluted rivers and vanishing forests. It was a trade-off that medieval society made without fully understanding the long-term consequences. Finally, let's close with a reflection on skill, mastery, and what it meant to truly be a master blacksmith. Because the journey from apprentice to master wasn't just about learning techniques. It was about developing an almost supernatural understanding of metal, fire, and craft. A master blacksmith could look at a piece of iron and know its quality just by examining the grain structure. He could hear the ring of a hammer on metal and tell whether the temperature was right. He could judge the precise moment to pull a blade from the fire for quenching. A split second too early or too late, and the blade was ruined. This knowledge didn't come from books. It came from years, decades of experience. Thousands of hours at the forge, making mistakes, learning, refining. A master blacksmith carried an encyclopedia of knowledge in his hands, his eyes, his instincts. He didn't think about what to do next. He just knew. There's a concept in craftsmanship called muscle memory. Your body remembers the motions so well that you don't have to consciously control them. A master blacksmith's hands moved on their own, striking the metal at the perfect angle with the perfect force, while his mind focused on the bigger picture. The shape he was creating, the quality he was achieving. But mastery came at a cost. By the time you reached that level of skill, your body was often failing. Your peak years as a craftsman were also the years when your joints hurt the most, your lungs struggled the most, your strength faded. It was a cruel irony. You finally knew everything, but you could barely do the work anymore. Some masters tried to pass on their knowledge before it was too late. They took apprentices seriously, teaching not just techniques, but the philosophy behind them. Listen to the metal, they'd say. It will tell you what it needs. These teachings sounded mystical, but they were practical wisdom distilled from a lifetime of experience. Others hoarded their knowledge, afraid that sharing it would diminish their own value. These masters died with their secrets, taking techniques and tricks to the grave, lost knowledge that could have benefited future generations. The true masters, the ones remembered and revered, were those who could blend art and craft. They made tools that were functional and beautiful, swords that balanced perfectly and featured elegant designs, decorative ironwork that looked delicate but was incredibly strong. This was the pinnacle of the craft, where form and function merged seamlessly. And when a master blacksmith finally passed away, the community felt the loss. Not just because they lost a skilled craftsman, but because they lost a repository of knowledge, a connection to the past, a symbol of what could be achieved through dedication and hard work. So, as we end this journey through the brutal, exhausting, painful world of medieval blacksmithing, let's remember that these weren't just laborers. They were artists, engineers, problem solvers, and survivors. They took raw earth and transformed it into tools that built civilization. They endured conditions we can barely imagine and created works that still inspire awe centuries later. Would you survive a single day as a medieval blacksmith? Probably not. But the fact that they did, that they survived not just days but years and decades, is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They didn't have our technology, our medicine, our understanding of safety and health. They just had will, skill, and an iron determination that matched the metal they shaped. As you drift off to sleep tonight, comfortable and safe, remember the blacksmiths. Remember the heat of the forge, the ring of the hammer, the smell of hot metal and coal smoke. Remember the pain, the poverty, the relentless grind of survival. and be grateful that you live in a time when such suffering is no longer necessary. But also, honor their legacy. Every time you use a tool, drive a nail, see a piece of decorative ironwork, remember that someone, somewhere in the past, stood at a forge and made that possible. The modern world is built on the backs of medieval blacksmiths, and we owe them more than we can ever repay. Rest well, knowing that their forges have long gone cold, but their legacy burns eternal. One final thought before we end. Think about the next time you pick up a hammer, turn a key in a lock, or see a piece of wrought iron. These simple objects, things we take completely for granted, once represented hours of backbreaking labor by someone whose name we'll never know. That nail holding your picture frame was once forged by hand, one at a time, by an apprentice whose fingers were raw and bleeding. That decorative hinge on an old building was shaped by a craftsman who breathed in toxic fumes with every strike of his hammer. That antique tool in your garage was made by someone who traded years of their life for a handful of coins. Medieval blacksmiths didn't have the luxury of choosing their profession. Most were born into it, inheriting the trade from fathers and grandfathers. It wasn't a calling, it was a sentence. But within that sentence, they found pride, purpose, and occasionally, moments of beauty. When a blacksmith created something truly exceptional, a sword that balanced perfectly, a gate with flowing scrollwork, a tool that fit the hand just right, there was satisfaction. Not happiness, perhaps, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of work done well. In a world of suffering and hardship, those moments mattered. Today, we stand on the shoulders of these forgotten giants. Every bridge, every building, every piece of infrastructure that makes modern life possible traces its lineage back to medieval smithies, back to men covered in soot and sweat, standing in the heat, shaping metal with nothing but skill and determination. So, honor them, remember them, and the next time you complain about your job, your commute, your comfortable office chair, take a moment to imagine swapping places with a medieval blacksmith. Imagine the heat, the pain, the exhaustion that never ends. Then maybe your own work won't seem quite so bad after all. Good night, and may your rest be as peaceful as the blacksmith's hammers are finally silent. Their work is done, but ours continues, built upon the foundation of iron and fire they laid so many centuries ago.